The galaxy remembered the fall of Cadia as a wound that never healed. Even now, aeons after the fortress world's final scream faded into the void, echoes of its death still wandered among the stars like restless ghosts. Entire constellations dimmed as though in mourning, and the great Astronomicon itself flickered with a sorrow that no mortal voice could name. Those who had stood upon Cadia's blackened soil swore they could still hear the thunder of a dying world cracking apart beneath their boots. The Imperium called it sacrifice. The traitor legions called it victory. But the truth was far heavier. Cadia had not simply fallen. It had been shattered by a betrayal so old and so vast that even now few dared speak its name. And to you listening now, know that this story holds weight, and you are not alone in hearing it. We tell it with sincerity and with real care, because the galaxy is wide and cold, and connection matters more than we admit. Before we begin the journey into these shadows, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, let us begin. The Cadian Gate had always stood like a clenched fist against the madness of the Eye of Terror. For 10,000 years its soldiers had lived and died beneath skies tainted by warp storms. They raised children not on lullabies, but on rifle drills. They carved their names into bunkers older than their grandfathers, and when the drums of war sounded, they did not run, they marched. They believed in duty, in the Emperor's light, and in the unbreakable walls of casa after casa. Yet belief is not always enough to stop the tide. One man understood this more deeply than most, Lord Castellan Varon Halbrecht, commander of the 93rd Cadian and survivor of 5 Black Crusades. His eyes were cold granite, and the scars across his face were older than many of the soldiers who saluted him. He had seen worlds burn, fleets break, and hope collapse like sand towers beneath tidal waves of demons. But never before had he felt the weight of inevitability until now. The skies above Cadia swirled with unnatural storms, clouds bleeding violet and green. The very air shuddered with whispers of things better left forgotten. Halbrecht stood upon the command bastion of Castra Vortigau, watching the horizon where reality itself rippled. Warp lightning crawled across the heavens like veins of madness. The growing storm felt less like weather and more like a presence, aware, hungry, waiting. And at its heart there was a voice. It had haunted him for weeks now, curling into the edges of his dreams, speaking in tones that should not have been possible. You stand against eternity, Castellan. You have always stood, but even stone wears away beneath the tide. He had not told anyone, not even the priests, not even the psychers. To speak of it aloud was to acknowledge its power, and Halbrecht refused to give the warp that satisfaction. Behind him, footsteps approached, measured, precise. It was Captain Sarah Elandris, one of his most trusted officers, a woman whose gaze was as steady as his own. She saluted, her posture perfect despite the fatigue that shadowed her eyes. "My lord," she began, "the 14th Casa regiments report that the outer bastions are holding, but casualties are rising. Supplies run thin. The men fight like lions, but—" Her voice faltered, just for a heartbeat. "The enemy numbers do not end." Halbrecht did not turn. "They are not meant to end. They are meant to break us." Sarah swallowed, then spoke more quietly. "Do you still believe we can hold?" The question hung suspended in the cold air between them. Halbrecht had once believed Cadia would never fall, that no matter how the galaxy bled, this world would endure. But as he looked upon the war-torn plains below, where columns of traitor armor rumbled like thunder, and the monstrous silhouettes of Chaos Titans stalked the horizon. Like walking blasphemies, he felt the truth like a blade in his chest. "We must hold," he answered at last, "because if we do not, the galaxy will drown." There was no room for weakness. Not here, not now. Yet something else weighed upon him. Something older than Cadia, older than the Imperium itself. A memory, or perhaps a prophecy, whispered by that voice in the storm. A star that refuses to die burns brightest before collapse. He did not know what it meant. Not yet. Far beyond the battlements, deep beneath Cadia's crust, ancient things stirred. Vaults sealed since the dawn of the galaxy trembled. Machines older than human history flickered to life, their emerald glow pulsing like a heartbeat. There, buried in forgotten catacombs, lay relics and memories of an age when the stars themselves had been soldiers in a war that scorched galaxies. Cadia had never been just a fortress. It had always been a lock, and the key was turning. Sarah spoke again, her voice brittle. A message just came through from Segmentum Command. Reinforcements are inbound, but... She hesitated. They estimate weeks. Albrecht did turn now. His eyes were not angry, they were tired. Then we must survive for weeks. He paused. Even if the world does not. She knew what he meant. They all did. Cadia would fall, but its people would not die in silence. They would carve their defiance into the bones of reality itself. For duty was not a word. It was a grave. The ground shook, distant thunder echoing through the walls. The first of the great siege engines had arrived. Albrecht drew his blade, not in readiness, but in remembrance. "For Cadia," he murmured. "For the Emperor," Sarah whispered. And somewhere in the storm, the voice laughed. The siege began not with a roar, but with a low vibration that trembled through the stone of Casa Vortigar. It was as though the world itself exhaled, not in surrender, but in grim acknowledgement of the trial to come. The sky above Cadia burned with warp-lit fire, vast rifts of impossible colour tearing open like infected wounds. From those wounds poured the legions of chaos, twisted infantry, engines of flesh and steel, abominations wearing armour older than human memory. The ground quaked beneath their march, dust rising in great choking clouds that turned the air sour, and above it all, thunder boomed, but there were no storms, only the echo of something ancient waking beneath the crust of the world. Lord Castellan Albrecht descended from the battlements in silence. His stride was firm, yet each movement carried the weight of inevitability. Sarah walked beside him, matching his pace without question. The command halls of Casa Vortigar were carved from ceramite and stone, reinforced by centuries of war. The walls bore the names of 1,000 fallen Casas, engraved in solemn remembrance. No matter how many times Albrecht passed them, he felt the weight of their gazes. Cadia had always been a grave for the enemy or for those sworn to defend it. Reports flooded the strategium. Vox channels crackled with frantic calls. The enemy had breached the outer defense lines near the Valley of Shattered Glass. The 54th Armoured had been overrun. The 22nd Infantry was down to 30% strength. Yet no one spoke of retreat. They did not know how. Cadians were born into war. They did not fear death. They feared failing their duty. Albrecht stopped before the main hololithic display, its flickering projection of Cadia marred with crimson markers. Enemy positions multiplied like a spreading infection. He placed one gauntleted hand upon the console, steadying himself. The voice that had haunted him flickered again at the edge of his thoughts, a whisper like cold breath behind his ear. The stone breaks. The gate falters. All that stands falls. He closed his eyes for the briefest heartbeat. He could not show doubt. Not here. Signal the Bastion 9th to reinforce the southern line, he ordered. Deploy reserve armor to the valley approach and recall the 501st from the western ridge. We will need them for the counter-assault. Sarah frowned. If we recall the 501st, we risk losing the ridge entirely. Halbrecht's gaze fixed on the holomap. We already have. Realization settled over the strategium like a shroud. The ridge had not fallen yet, but he had seen this battle 100 times, in simulations, in doctrine, and in the cold logic of attrition. The ridge was already a sacrifice. Choosing when it burned was the only decision left. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she did not argue. A new transmission cut through the chaos, a voice sharp and crackling with static. Command, this is Lieutenant Mikos of the 14th Casa. We found something under the catacombs of Vortigar. Something wrong. The earth is moving. The walls are. Emperor, preserve us. The stone is breathing. Halbrecht and Sarah exchanged a look. The ancient catacombs beneath Cadia had always been forbidden, not by decree, but by instinct. The first Cadians had built over them, not within them. The ground beneath the fortress world had always felt watched. The priests claimed the catacombs were sanctified. The psychers claimed they were haunted. The truth had never been spoken. Halbrecht motioned to Sarah. With me. They left the strategium and moved through corridors lit by flickering lumen strips. The deeper they descended, the more the air changed. It grew colder, not the cold of stone, but the cold of something vast and buried, dreaming. The catacombs were older than the fortress above, their walls carved with symbols no imperial scholar could decipher. Worn pictoglyphs depicted figures of impossible height, wielding weapons of light, striding among stars. But the faces were wrong, blank, expressionless, devoid of humanity. Halbrecht had seen similar designs only once, in a classified archive aboard a black ship. Symbols attributed to the Necrontyr, an empire that predated mankind by millions of years. As they moved deeper, the stone shifted. A faint pulse throbbed through the floor, like a heartbeat in the earth itself. The air tasted metallic, heavy with ozone and something older, a scent like dust from before the dawn of suns. The passage widened, opening into a vast chamber half buried beneath collapsed rubble. Cadian soldiers stood in a perimeter, weapons drawn but held too tightly. They stared at the center of the chamber, where an enormous structure lay partially unearthed, smooth, metallic, impossibly black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It pulsed, slow and steady. Sarah stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. Is that a tomb? Halbrecht did not answer. He knew, and the knowing chilled him. The Cadian gate had never been built to guard the Imperium from the Eye of Terror. The gate had been built to guard something much older, something buried beneath Cadia itself. The ground trembled again, this time louder. A hairline fracture split across the surface of the tomb. Green light seeped out, dim at first, then growing brighter, pulsing in time with that impossible heartbeat. One of the soldiers stepped forward before anyone could stop him. His voice was small, like a child gazing into a storm. My lord, is something waking? The tomb answered for Halbrecht. The pulse of light flared, washing across the chamber in a silent wave. The air crackled with energy. The soldiers staggered. Sarah clutched her chest, gasping as though the air had been ripped from her lungs. Halbrecht felt the voice surge into his mind, not whispering now, but speaking with clarity that froze his blood. The key turns, the lock breaks. The gate was never for the warp. It was for us. The tomb was not a relic. It was a prison. And Cadia had been the cage. But now, under the pressure of the siege, under the strain of the warp storms, under the weight of a world forced to its knees, the cage was breaking. Halbrecht stepped back. "Seal this chamber," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "My lord," Sarah began. "Seal it." The soldiers moved, but they were too late. The fracture split wider. Metal peeled like flesh, and from within the tomb something stirred. Not alive, not dead, something in between. Above them, far beyond the catacombs, artillery roared and the world shook as Chaos Titans opened fire. The battle above was reaching its peak, but beneath the ground, another war was beginning. One far older and far more devastating. Cadia was not simply a battlefield, it was a fuse, and it had just been lit. The crack widening across the tomb's surface spilled emerald light into the catacombs, staining every shadow a sickly, unnatural hue. The soldiers tried to fall back in formation, but their steps faltered as the very air thickened, humming with a resonance that felt like a memory, one that did not belong to any of them. Halbrecht steadied himself against the ancient stone wall, the pulse of the awakening artifact reverberating through his bones. He had seen armies fall, worlds fracture, and the warp twist reality into nightmares. But this was something older than fear. It was inevitability given form. The ground trembled beneath their feet, dust falling in thin streams from the vaulted ceiling. The metallic structure at the chamber's center shifted again, folding and unfolding like a serpent, shedding ancient skin. Sarah's breath caught. She raised her rifle, though they both knew it was meaningless. "My lord," she whispered, "what is happening?" Halbrecht answered with difficulty. Something buried, something that should never have seen the light. Another pulse surged outward from the tomb, stronger than before. The lumen strips along the walls flickered violently, then burst, plunging the chamber into darkness for one suffocating heartbeat. When light returned, it was not from the Imperium's power grid, but from within the tomb itself. The black metal peeled back at last, revealing a figure suspended in a column of shimmering light. Not flesh, not fully metal. Its shape was elongated, its limbs too long, its skull-like visage devoid of expression. Its chest glowed with a core of cold emerald fire. A Necron. Not one of rank-and-file warriors, but something higher. Something designed to lead, to command, to remember. It drifted forward, not walking but gliding, the air warping around it. The Cadian soldiers froze, terror gripping them like iron shackles. Some tried to raise weapons, but their hands trembled. Others whispered prayers. None fired. The figure lowered to the stone floor. The light around it dimmed. Its eyes, if the glowing green sockets could be called eyes, lifted and focused first on the soldiers, then on Halbrecht. When it spoke, its voice was not sound. It was memory, projected directly into their minds. This world was never yours. The soldiers reeled back as though struck. One dropped his rifle entirely, gasping for breath. Halbrecht felt the weight of the words coil around his thoughts, threading through his memories, probing, searching. Not cruelty, curiosity. Sarah managed a step forward. "Identify yourself." The figure tilted its head, as though analyzing language itself. "I was Kepran, Vizier of the Sundered Star Courts. I was Warden of the Void Gate, Guardian of what must remain sealed." The tomb walls hummed. The pulse that had been steady now accelerated. throbbing like the heartbeat of something awakening deeper within the planet's crust. Halbrecht found his voice, though it sounded distant. Cadia was built to guard you. The Necron regarded him for a long, silent moment. Cadia was built to guard what lies beneath me. The words struck harder than artillery. If this was a prison warden, then there was something deeper, something worse. Above them, the world roared. The thunder of orbital bombardment shook dust loose in a steady rain. The chronovox units of the soldiers crackled with half-transmitted screams from the battlefield overhead. The siege continued, unaware that the ground they fought on was splitting open beneath their feet. A soldier from the 14th regained enough clarity to act. He lifted his lasgun and fired. The beam of red light snapped through the chamber and vanished into the Necron's chest without leaving so much as a mark. What did show was the response. In a motion too swift to follow, the Necron raised its hand. A beam of energy, not hot, not cold, but void, lanced outward. The soldier did not fall. He simply ceased. One moment he stood. The next, only drifting ash remained. Panic erupted. Shots rang out. Voices shouted. Fear overcame discipline in an instant. Halbrecht stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the Necron. "Hold your fire." The echoes of gunfire died reluctantly. The Necron lowered its arm. Fear is not required, only understanding. Serra's voice was steady, but Halbrecht heard the tremor beneath it. Understanding what? The Necron turned its gaze downward, toward the trembling floor. The chains are breaking. The prison beneath Cadia dissolves. What was sealed will rise. You cannot stop it. You can only choose how you die. The chamber shook violently, stone cracking, the entire catacomb groaning as though the world itself was straining to remain whole. A surge of warp light flared through the cracks, purple and green fire bleeding into the world from below. The Necron recoiled, not in fear, but in recognition. The warp leaks. The star wound widens. Halbrecht realized then what the voice in the storm had been. Not chaos, no. Something else had spoken to him. Something that now watched from below, not above. A presence from the deep places of time. Serra grasped his arm. "My lord, we need to move. If this chamber collapses..." The ceiling shuddered, stone boulders falling in bursts. Halbrecht nodded once. "Fall back. Do not engage." We returned to the surface. The soldiers obeyed, though many cast glances back over their shoulders. The Necron did not pursue. It watched, silent, still, eternal. As Halbrecht ascended the stairs, the voice returned. Not the Necron this time, but the whisper that had haunted him since the storm began. The gate fails, the tide returns, and the star that refuses to die must choose what it burns for. He did not understand. Not yet. They emerged back into the fortress halls as a new wave of artillery struck. The walls trembled, alarms howled, Vox units screamed requests for reinforcements that did not exist. Smoke drifted through the corridors like mourning veils. War had returned to the surface. Halbrecht and Serra pushed through the chaos toward the battlements. When they reached the outer walls, the sight that greeted them stole the air from their lungs. The horizon was gone. All of it. Not obscured, consumed. The sky was swallowed by a vast, impossible storm. Green lightning arcing through churning warp clouds, spreading like a great wound torn open across reality. At its center, towering shapes moved, colossal silhouettes of demons and war engines marching in step. The earth itself split apart in great yawning fissures, swallowing trenches, tanks and men alike. The 501st, the regiment Halbrecht had recalled, fought desperately in the valley below. tiny figures against the monstrous advance. Their lines buckled, but they did not break. Not yet. Sarah's voice was barely audible. If the Necron speaks truth, if something beneath Cadia awakens, Halbrecht finished for her, then this war is no longer about holding the gate. He stared at the storm, at the valley, at the world that had been his entire life. It is about preventing the unsealing of a tomb older than chaos. A final devastating realization struck him then. If Cadia fell, not just to the traitors, but to what slept beneath, the galaxy did not simply lose a fortress. It lost its last lock. The storm above roared louder, a vast, unholy bellow shaking the skies. The siege was no longer a battle. It was the opening of a door. And Halbrecht had just seen what waited on the other side. The storm consumed the sky, a churning bruise of warp light and thunder without sound. The valley below Casa Vortiga, once a barren expanse of shattered crystal and ancient debris, now writhed with movement. The 501st held their position by sheer force of will, their ranks forming a thin line of defiance between the fortress and the advancing legions of chaos. The roar of battle rose in a relentless crescendo. Lasfire crackling, heavy bolters thundering, artillery shaking the earth itself. Yet even through the chaos, Halbrecht's focus was fixed not on the enemy he could see, but the one beneath his feet. The tomb had been a warning, not just of the Necron awakening, but of what was chained deeper still. And now, Cadia's crust trembled with each bombardment, as if the world was being pounded apart, not merely by siege, but to break the final seal. Sarah stood beside him upon the battlements, helmet off, face drawn tight. Smoke and ash clung to her hair. Her eyes, though exhausted, remained sharp. The 501st can't hold that valley much longer. They'll be overwhelmed. Halbrecht watched the valley floor split open in jagged lines, like the cracking of old porcelain. Their purpose was never to stop the advance. Their purpose is time. Sarah did not look away. Time for what? Halbrecht's jaw set, the weight of his next words like stone in his chest. To decide who we are in the face of the ending. A scream of tearing air cut through the sky as something massive descended. An immense demon engine, its metal hide seething with fused flesh, wings of flayed sinew beating against the storm. It landed among the 501st with the force of a falling star, crushing men, tanks, and trenches alike. The creature roared, the sound vibrating the air thick with warp sickness. Halbrecht saw the line buckle. If it broke fully, the valley would be lost, and the fortress would be next. He turned sharply. Prepare the gates, mobilize the Helpir Company and the Kassakin reserves. We hold that valley, or we die here. Sarah did not hesitate. She sprinted for the Vox relays, her voice already ringing across the fortress command network. Halbrecht descended the battlements and emerged into the courtyard where Cadian soldiers assembled. Their armor was scorched, helmets dented, rifles held with trembling but unbroken hands. They were tired, beyond tired, but their eyes were steady. He stood before them, drawing his sword, holding it aloft. The blade caught the flickering light of burning skies. Cadia does not yield, he said, not in a shout, but a voice carved from granite. The soldiers echoed, Cadia stands. And though the world trembled beneath them, as if rejecting the very claim, they marched. They moved through the main gates into the valley itself. Boots striking broken ground glowing faintly from warp energy. The air was thick with ash and ozone. The smell of burning metal and something far worse, something ancient, clung to every breath. The 501st were nearly spent. Their tanks lay shattered or burning. Their officers shouted orders more out of instinct than expectation. And yet they did not flee. They reloaded. They rallied. They fought as though nothing could unmake them. Halbrecht's arrival cut through the chaos like a knife. The men saw him, and something shifted. Not hope, not quite, but the remembrance of purpose. He pointed his blade toward the demon engine towering above them. Its maw dripped molten iron, its optics burning like the hollow eyes of corpses. "On me!" he roared. The Cadians surged. Sarah, fighting beside him, fired burst after burst into the creature's joints, aiming for the weak points only years of war could teach one to see. Halbrecht closed the distance, dodging a descending limb of serrated metal that crunched into the ground, sending up shards of shattered crystal. He leapt onto the beast chassis, gripping scorched armor. His sword plunged deep, carving a glowing line of fractured runes. The creature shrieked, a sound that was less scream and more tearing of reality, and bucked wildly. Halbrecht was thrown, crashing into the ground hard enough to crack his armor plating. The world spun, dust and pain filling his vision. But he forced himself upright, staggering back into motion before thought could slow him. The Cadians pressed forward again. Plasma fire lit the air in arcs of blue. Meltagons flared white-hot. The demon engine's armor blistered and cracked, and at last, its towering form collapsed, crashing into the valley floor with a quake of finality. A cheer rose, but only briefly, for the storm above twisted again. Something else was coming, not from the sky, from below. The ground split open in a jagged rupture that stretched across the valley like a wound. Emerald light burst upward in blinding radiance, forcing soldiers to shield their eyes. The air vibrated with a frequency that felt like it bypassed the ears and spoke directly into the mind. Every Cadian froze, not from fear, but from recognition. The same silent voice, the one that had stirred beneath the tomb. The prison breaks. Halbrecht steadied himself, gripping his sword. He saw shapes moving within the light, vast metallic forms rising from the abyss. Not demons, not traitors, necrons. But these were not warriors. They were custodians, guardians, constructs of monumental scale. Their bodies formed of interlocking plates that glowed with ancient sigils. They ascended like titans of old myth, their presence both terrible and regal. Sarah stared, breath stolen. If they rise now, the Chaos Legions will clash with them. Halbrecht nodded slowly, and the battlefield becomes something far worse than war. Because two ancient powers awakening upon the same soil did not fight battles. They tore reality apart. The first of the colossal Necron constructs finished its ascent, standing taller than the fortress walls themselves. It turned its head, slowly, deliberately, toward the Chaos Hordes. Its chest blazed with emerald fire. A single wave of energy burst outward, disintegrating everything in its path. Demons, traitors, corrupted machines, reduced to drifting motes of dust carried by the wind. The valley fell silent, not in peace, in awe. Even the warp storm overhead faltered, its roiling form hesitating, as though something on the other side remembered fear. But Halbrecht understood something then, cold and certain. The Necrons were not here to save Cadia. They were here to reclaim it. Sarah's voice trembled now, not from fear, but from comprehension. If this continues, neither side will stop. The Chaos Legions will not retreat, and the Necrons will not be negotiated with. Halbrecht watched the Emerald Titan raise its arm again, preparing its next annihilating strike. Then Cadia becomes the battleground of two ancient empires, he said softly, and we are the collateral. The ground cracked once more, deeper this time, the sound rolling across the valley like the groan of a dying world. The fortress walls behind them shuddered. The emerald fissure expanded, slowly, steadily. Something deeper than Necrons was waking, something older than empires. Halbrecht felt the whisper again, not external, but now within him. You stand at the gate of endings. Choose what survives. He did not answer. He did not have the answer, not yet. But the time to find one was rapidly running out. The emerald fissure, widening across the valley, bathed the battlefield in a cold, otherworldly glow. Dust and ash settled in slow drifts, stirred only by the faint tremors still shaking the ground. The immense Necron construct stood motionless now, its gaze fixed not upon the Chaos Legions regrouping across the shattered plain, but upon the widening rift itself. It waited, not with patience, but with purpose, like a sentinel that had always known this moment would come. Halbrecht's breathing came slow and steady as he took in the scene before him. The 501st had fallen into a defensive posture behind what remained of their tanks, using debris and broken armor as improvised cover. Serra knelt beside a wounded trooper, tying a tourniquet with practiced efficiency. Even now, with reality unraveling around them, she moved with the calm certainty of someone who refused to surrender to chaos. Her hands did not shake. Halbrecht looked to the horizon where the warp storm writhed like a living wound. The Chaos Legions were already reforming, pulling their lines back, not in retreat, no, but to reorganize, to adapt to the new shape of the battlefield. They had not expected the Necrons, but they were not deterred. The warp did not fear the old empire of metal. It had devoured far greater things. A new shape emerged within the storm, wings of shadow spreading wide enough to darken the valley. A towering figure of obsidian armor and molten eyes stepped forward, each footfall accompanied by thunder. Halbrecht recognized the silhouette instantly. Abaddon, the Despoiler, Warmaster of Chaos, bringer of 1,000 wars. Serra rose to stand beside him. If Abaddon moves now, the valley will break. Halbrecht nodded, though his gaze did not leave the battlefield. He does not need to win here. He only needs to keep the Necrons occupied while the seal breaks. Serra followed his gaze to the widening fissure, where the emerald light pulsed like the heartbeat of something buried deep below the planet's mantle. "We need to close that rift," she said quietly, "no matter what it takes." Halbrecht did not respond. He already knew what it would take. The pulse of the rift intensified. The Necron Titan turned its head slowly toward the Chaos lines, energy gathering in its chest. Abaddon answered with a raised blade wreathed in warp fire. The forces of two ancient rivalries, Chaos and Necronkind, prepared to collide. Halbrecht gripped his sword so tightly the metal of his gauntlet creaked. "Serra, get the 501st back to the fortress. Prepare evacuation paths. I need the command box open to every remaining Casa still standing. We need to unify the lines." She stared at him. "And you?" He stepped toward the center of the valley. "I go to parley." The words landed like a thunderbolt. Serra took one step forward, disbelief breaking her composure. "My lord, you can't negotiate with Chaos. They will not stop. They do not compromise. I am not speaking to Chaos," he said. His eyes fixed on the Necron Titan. The Titan's glow intensified, scanning the battlefield with cold precision. Halbrecht walked forward, sword lowered, not as a gesture of surrender, but of intent. Serra called after him, but she did not follow. She knew better. Some paths belonged only to one. The Necron Titan shifted its massive form, emerald sigils rippling across its surface like shifting constellations. When Halbrecht reached the burning line of ash, where the battlefield had been scoured clean moments before, the Titan lowered its gaze. The air hummed. The valley fell silent, not by command, but by presence. A voice entered his mind, not whispering now, but clear, defined, ancient. "You seek to speak." Halbrecht bowed his head once, not low, but measured. "If the rift below opens fully, both the warp and your kind will destroy this world. Everything here dies, not just Cadia." The Titan did not move, but the air shivered with response. Cadia was always meant to fall. It is the key. The seal fails by necessity. Halbrecht's jaw tightened. "You claim to be guarding it, yet you allow it to break." The Titan's voice rumbled like tectonic plates grinding. "We guard the prison, but our power wanes. The chains were forged by those who came before us, before even the old ones. We cannot maintain them alone." Halbrecht understood then why the tomb had stirred beneath the fortress. The Necrons had not awakened to conquer. They had awakened because the prison beneath Cadia was failing. Not by their will, but by the endless siege that had shaken Cadia for 10,000 years. The Necrons had not chosen this moment. The moment had been forced upon them. Halbrecht took a breath. What lies beneath this world? What breaks free if the seal fails? The Titan's chest flickered with a pulse of cold light. Something older than chaos. Older than the Necron. A star god that refused to die. Halbrecht felt the words like a blade driven between his ribs. A Citan. A shard of the God-Eaters. Not one of the broken fragments already known, but something whole. Something entire. Sarah had reached his side without him noticing. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "If it wakes, the galaxy ends." Halbrecht's throat felt dry. His next question was not strategy. It was desperation. "How do we stop it?" The Titan's answer came like the tolling of a funeral bell. "We do not stop it. We contain it. But containment requires a sacrifice." Sarah's breath hitched. A sacrifice of what? The Titan turned its gaze upon Halbrecht, and in that moment he understood fully. It was not asking for soldiers, nor worlds, nor armies. It required Cadia, the planet itself. To seal the ancient thing beneath, Cadia had to fall completely, broken, shattered, collapsed inward to bury the prison forever. Halbrecht felt his legs weaken, not from fear, but from the enormity of the decision placed upon him. Cadia did not simply need to be defended. Cadia needed to die. Sarah looked at him with a horror she could not voice. "My lord, no, we are Cadian. We stand. We do not choose destruction. We do not surrender our world." Halbrecht closed his eyes. He saw the children training in casas before they could speak. He saw soldiers marching to war with no expectation of return. He saw generations who had known nothing but duty. Cadia's people had never been protected by their world. They had been the world. He opened his eyes. "Our duty was never to endure," he said quietly. "It was to hold long enough for the galaxy to survive what comes next." Sarah shook her head slowly, tears gathering but not falling. "You would consign us to oblivion." Halbrecht's voice did not break. It could not. "We hold the line, even if the line breaks with us." Above them, Abaddon raised his blade to strike. The Necron Titan raised its cannon to fire. And beneath them, something ancient drew its first breath in a million years. The final choice lay before Halbrecht. Hold Cadia and doom the galaxy, or sacrifice Cadia to save it. There was no victory, only cost. The valley thundered with the clash of ancient titans, but Halbrecht heard none of it clearly now. His thoughts had narrowed to a single terrible thread. The Necron Titan's revelation did not fade. It echoed, repeating with the cold finality of judgment. Cadia must fall. The prison beneath the world could only remain sealed if the planet was shattered, crushed inward under its own collapsing mass. Duty had always defined Cadian lives, but now duty demanded their end. Sarah stood close beside him, her armor cracked, her rifle held loosely at her side. The glow of the rift washed over her features, painting them with pale emerald light. She looked not broken, but unanchored, as though the foundation of her entire life had shifted beneath her feet. "What you're considering," she whispered. "It goes beyond sacrifice. This isn't holding the line. This is erasing a world. Our world." Halbrecht did not respond immediately. He stood with eyes locked on the churning rift below, where something vast stirred, its presence pressing against reality like a fist against thin glass. The warp storm above flickered in answer, as if eager to widen the breach. Chaos wanted the seal broken. The Necrons wanted it buried. And Cadia was the hinge upon which both fates turned. He sheathed his sword with slow, deliberate movement. The sound of metal sliding home seemed deafening in the tense stillness. "Come," he said quietly. "We return to the command bastion." Sarah blinked. "We're retreating." "No," he answered. "We are choosing where to stand." They moved back across the valley as explosions flared around them. The 501st continued their desperate war against the Chaos Vanguard, tanks limping forward on broken tracks, infantry firing into the storm even when their rifles overheated, even when their armor cracked, even when blood ran into their eyes. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and surrounded by forces that should have broken them hours ago. And yet, they held, not because they believed they could win, but because they believed the line must never fall. They were born to stand where others would break. As Halbrecht and Sarah passed, soldiers pointed, recognizing the Castellan silhouette. Some raised tired salutes, others simply nodded, understanding that something was being decided at a level far above the battlefield's chaos. Halbrecht did not look back at the Necron Titan. He did not look toward Abaddon, now pressing forward with his Black Legion like an obsidian tide. He did not look toward the ancient rift, or the impossible thing awakening beneath Cadia. He looked toward the walls of Casa Vortigar, scarred, cracked, burning, and saw his people. Cadians in defensive lines, medics dragging wounded, artillery crews desperately adjusting firing angles, civilians helping to move ammunition crates because there were no unneeded hands left. Every one of them knew they were already dead, but none of them moved with despair. They moved with duty. Inside the command chamber, the atmosphere was grim but organized. Officers spoke in steady tones. Strategium hollows flickered with red and amber warnings. Vox communications crackled with regiment status updates. No panic. Panic was for those who believed they might live. General Voss, his face drawn and hollow-eyed, turned as Halbrecht entered. "We're stretched to breaking across all fronts. The line at Casa Dathos collapsed. Casa Tira has gone dark. If this continues for another hour..." "It will not," Halbrecht interrupted. The room stilled. They knew that tone, the tone of command that did not waver. But the silence that followed it was heavier than any order they had heard before. Sarah stepped forward, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We have discovered what lies beneath the rift. This siege is not about Cadia. It is about what is imprisoned under it. If the planet holds, chaos will break the seal. If the planet falls, the seal remains. Cadia is not simply a fortress. It is the lock." The room went still, not in disbelief, but in dawning horror. Voss swallowed. You are saying the world must be destroyed. Halbrecht met his gaze. Yes. Gasps rose. Not loud, but small, wounded sounds. A young officer whispered, "But my family." Halbrecht cut him no space for comfort. They will meet the Emperor with honor. Serra looked away, unable to soften the words. A senior artillery officer stepped forward, voice hard and steady. "How?" That was the Cadian response. Not refusal, not pleading. "How?" Halbrecht gestured toward the hololithic display. "There are munitions stockpiles beneath every casa, deep reserves, siege charges meant for planetary denial protocols. They were never intended to be used." His voice lowered. "But they can collapse the mantle." Voss closed his eyes. A world-shatter order. Halbrecht nodded once. Silence fell again, deep and suffocating. Serra spoke, her voice quiet, but strong enough to carry through the hall. "If Cadia falls by our hand, then Cadia stands forever. We deny the enemy the prize they cross the stars for. We bury the prison so deep it will never be found again." Halbrecht stepped forward, looking into the faces of every commander present. "Our people were never meant to survive. We were meant to be remembered." A murmur rose, not of dissent, of acceptance. General Voss raised his hand. Slowly, he saluted. "For Cadia." One by one, every commander echoed it. "For Cadia." Halbrecht exhaled once, only once, then turned to the Master Vox array. He keyed the planet-wide channel, linking every regiment, every bastion, every survivor still fighting across the burning world. Static crackled. Then silence. He spoke. "Cadians, sons and daughters of the gate." Across trenches, bunkers, war rooms, and burning city streets, soldiers stopped. Civilians lifted their heads. Wounded men pressed blood-soaked fingers to vox beads to hear. For 10,000 years we have stood. We have held the line when all others have fallen. We have faced nightmares that no mortal mind should endure. And now the last purpose of our world is upon us. His voice did not tremble. "We are the gate. We are the shield. We are the stone upon which the tide breaks." He paused, just long enough for the truth to sink into every heart. Cadia must fall. No scream rose, no cry of despair, only a silence so solid it felt like the beating heart of the world had paused to listen. We do not fear this duty. We accept it. We end this not with surrender, but with defiance. The galaxy will remember not that Cadia fell, but how she fell. He closed his eyes. This is our final stand. He lowered his hand to the activation sigil. All across the planet, ancient warlocks of ceramite and adamantium primed. The world trembled. Above the valley, Abaddon raised his sword. The Necron Titan lifted its cannon. And far below, the ancient thing in the rift drew closer to waking. Halbrecht whispered, not to his soldiers, not to the Emperor, but to Cadia itself. "Hold the line." He pressed the ignition. The detonation order spread through Cadia like a silent signal in the blood. Deep beneath every casa, beneath every fortress and trench network, beneath even the ancient stone foundations of Casa Vortigar, seismic charges hummed to life. They were old things, older than many of the soldiers who now fought above them, built for a scenario no Cadian had ever believed would come to pass. Yet there they were, now armed, waiting, buried in the heart of a dying world. Halbrecht stood upon the battlements once more, feeling the tremor of the activation sequence below. There was no turning back now. The planet itself had been given its final command. Serra stood beside him, silent. The valley glowed with emerald and crimson fire. The Necron Titan and the demonic horde poised on opposite sides of the widening rift. Abaddon was there. unmistakable in his towering black armor, the talon of Horus crackling with warp lightning. He stared up at the fortress as if he could feel the decision that had just been made, though he could not yet know its meaning. Halbrecht's thoughts moved like steel gears grinding under strain. He felt the ache in his limbs, the exhaustion behind his eyes, the slow drag of a soul that had already accepted death, and yet there was no resignation in him. This end was not despair, it was resolve. A Vox operator called out behind him, voice trembling but controlled. "My lord, the charges are active across 3/4 of Cadia. Several cassers are still confirming their priming sequences." Halbrecht nodded. "They will. No Cadian leaves their post unfinished." Sarah looked to him, her expression steady now, not because she had accepted the loss of Cadia, but because she had understood its necessity. "When the charges go, we won't have long. The mantle collapse will begin almost instantly." Halbrecht's gaze drifted toward the heart of the rift. "Then we finish before that." A sudden shockwave tore across the valley, the air rippling like heat over stone. The Necron Titan and Abaddon both turned toward the fissure as a plume of emerald fire erupted skyward, and from deep within the light, a voice rose, not spoken, not audible, but felt. It reverberated through bone and memory in the very structure of the world. "I awaken." The sound was not rage, it was inevitability, the voice of something that had once devoured stars and shaped empires with a mere thought. A Cetan shard, whole and unbroken. The ground fractured again. Massive plates of stone and crystal shifted like tectonic plates sliding beneath an ocean. Halbrecht staggered, but Sarah caught his arm. Soldiers along the battlements clung to whatever they could. Tanks in the valley slid sideways as the ground tilted. A massive fragment of the battlefield collapsed into the rift, taking screaming chaos warriors with it. Abaddon roared a command, audible even through the storm. His legions surged forward, not toward the Cadians now, but toward the rift. They would reach it, they would seize it, they would tear the seal wide open. But the Necron Titan moved faster. It stepped forward, light blazing from the glyphs etched across its armored form. It lifted both arms toward the rift, channeling power older than humanity itself. The ground trembled, the storm above flickered, the Cetan's emergence slowed, but did not stop. Sarah spoke, her voice low. "They can't contain it alone." "No," Halbrecht murmured. "Nor can we stop the War Master and his legions by force." Sarah's gaze hardened. "Then we strike at him directly." Halbrecht met her eyes. No words were needed. She understood the risk. So did he. It did not matter. He turned to the surviving officers behind him. "Hold the walls. Do not allow the traitors to breach. Buy us the seconds we need." One officer saluted. Another simply nodded. None asked where their commander was going. Halbrecht and Sarah descended from the battlements, moving down the rampways and out into the valley. The air was thick with dust and warp fire, the ground slipping beneath their boots as fissures opened and closed like the breaths of a wounded god. Soldiers fell in around them, not ordered, not commanded, but choosing to follow. 30 men, then 60, then more. A broken regiment perhaps, but one that still marched. They moved directly toward Abaddon. The War Master saw them coming. His helm turned, eyes smouldering like coals burning in an ancient furnace. He stepped forward from his legion, towering above the ravaged earth, his sword burning with the stolen power of a god. Halbrecht felt no fear. Not anymore. Abaddon spoke, his voice echoing across the valley like thunder rolling over a tomb. "Cadia falls today. Halbrecht's reply was not shouted. It did not need to be. Cadia chooses how it falls. Abaddon surged forward, a tidal wave of armoured fury. Halbrecht and Sarah broke into a sprint, the soldiers behind them unleashing every remaining round they had. Bolts, lasfire, plasma bursts, all lit the air in a final storm of defiance. The ground erupted around them as the first of the Black Legion clashed with the Cadians. Screams and metal and blood filled the valley once more. But Halbrecht saw only one path, one target, one end. The War Master crashed into him like a hammer of eternity, the sheer force of the blow shattering the stone beneath their feet. Halbrecht's blade met the talon of Horus, sparks flying in a blinding flash. Abaddon pressed forward, strength inhuman and unstoppable. Halbrecht's legs buckled, but he did not fall. Sarah came from the side, striking at the War Master's armour with a charged blade. The blow left only a scar, but it drew Abaddon's attention. He struck at her with a sweeping blow that would have cleaved her in half had Halbrecht not shoved her clear. The talon carved through his armour, blood spraying across shattered ground. He staggered, but remained standing. Abaddon's voice was a snarl. All your defiance ends here. All your generations. All your hope. Halbrecht spat blood, his voice rough but unwavering. Hope was never our strength. He drove his blade forward, not at the War Master, but into the ground beneath them. The detonator embedded in its hilt ignited. The earth screamed. A fracture split outward in a ring, the shockwave tearing through the battlefield. Chaos warriors and Cadians alike were thrown from their feet. The rift surged, the Citan's form struggling to rise as the ground collapsed beneath it. Sirah's eyes widened. The charges, my lord, they're primed. Halbrecht met her gaze. It's time. She did not cry. She did not break. She nodded. Above them, the Necron Titan raised both arms skyward. A blast of emerald annihilation erupted outward, tearing the warp storm open, slowing the Citan's emergence by mere seconds. But seconds were enough. Halbrecht lifted his hand to the Mastervox control on his armour. His voice was quiet, calm, certain. Cadia, execute planetary collapse protocol. Across the planet, volts of ancient explosives detonated. The world began to die. The crust split. Mountains folded. Oceans boiled. The sky cracked open into raw warp fire. The rift howled in fury, the Citan's form twisting as molten stone poured onto it like liquid nightfall. Abaddon roared, not in triumph, but in rage, because victory had been stolen from him. And Halbrecht felt the world shudder beneath him, not in fear, but in release. Cadia was falling, but not broken, fulfilled. As the last of the ground gave way beneath them, Halbrecht reached for Sarah's hand, not as command, but as farewell. She grasped it, strong and steady, even as the earth dissolved beneath their feet. The planet that had never bowed, never surrendered, never yielded, chose its own end, and in doing so, saved a galaxy that would never even understand what it had owed. Cadia did not shatter all at once. It broke like a heart breaks, slowly at first, then all at once and without mercy. The first detonations thundered deep within the mantle, echoing upward like the roar of a beast trapped beneath stone. The ground lurched, the sky convulsed, and fault lines tore themselves open across continents. Casas that had stood for millennia cracked along their foundations, their spires collapsing inward in slow, dreadful cascades. The void shield generators flickered, then died entirely, their protective fields collapsing like candlelight in a hurricane. The rift at the valley's center widened, raw emerald fire billowing upward in a great column of light that pierced the roiling heavens. The half-awakened Citan writhed in the burning chaos of molten stone and fracturing reality, a silhouette of impossible geometry that flickered between form and unform. The Necron Titan held its position before the rift, its arms raised in a final act of defiance, channeling energies that burned through its own frame. Its once flawless armor cracked and flaked away, glowing with internal heat. It did not retreat. It did not hesitate. Above the battlefield, Abaddon roared in fury, slamming the talon of a Horus into the earth with such force that the ground cratered beneath him. The light of the detonations flickered across his warplate, illuminating the scars and runes etched into it by gods and monsters alike. The War Master understood too late what Halbrecht had done. He had not merely denied Chaos victory. He had severed the very prize the Dark Gods had crossed the stars to claim. Cadia would not be taken. Cadia would be buried. Halbrecht and Sarah fell together through the cracking valley floor as the last of their footing gave way. The air rushed around them, the sound of collapsing stone drowning even the thunder of the sky. They did not let go of one another. There was no fear in either of them now, only the raw, terrible clarity of peace, the peace of a duty fulfilled. But death did not claim them in that instant. Instead, the world caught them in a shifting lattice of metal and light. The same emerald glow that had signaled the rising of the Necron prison now surrounded them. No longer a threat, but a containment. The Titan had reached them. Even as its limbs fractured under the strain of resisting the awakening god thing below, it diverted a fraction of its failing power to shield the two humans who had chosen the fate of the world. Sarah gasped as their fall slowed, suspended by a field of shimmering force. Halbrecht reached out, steadying her. The air around them sizzled with heat, the pressure of a dying world bearing down upon them. The Titan's voice was fainter now, strained, as if speaking through a great distance or through centuries of dust and memory. The lock holds. The prison remains. Your world ends, but your sacrifice endures. Halbrecht swallowed against the dryness in his throat. You saved us. No, the Titan's voice pulsed, diminishing, flickering. I saved the memory of your choice. Your survival is incidental. Around them, the battlefield dissolved into falling stone and drifting ash. The 501st, scattered across the valley, were swallowed in flashes of green and bursts of molten red. The traitor legions reeled as the ground collapsed beneath them, some fleeing back toward the warp storms from which they had come. Others were pulled screaming into the widening fissures. Abaddon stood unmoving for a moment more, as if daring the world to finish him alongside it. His eyes blazed with hatred, not for Cadia, not for Halbrecht, but for the thing that had refused him victory. Then he vanished, swallowed in a crackling ripple of warp energy, retreating not in defeat, but in fury. The Necron Titan sank to one knee, its towering form flickering like a dying star. Its chest core fractured, energy spilling from it in wild arcs. The Titan could no longer sustain itself in the gravitational chaos tearing the planet apart. And yet, even in collapse, it held its position before the rift, preventing the Citan from rising any further. Remember, its voice tremored through the collapsing valley. The gate has held because you chose for it to. Halbrecht knelt, still supporting Sarah. He felt the deck of a metal platform forming beneath his feet as the Titan assembled a final structure around them. A transport. No, not a transport. A memory capsule. The Titan intended them to live, not as refugees, as witnesses. Sarah's voice was quiet, cracking only once. We'll leave everyone behind. Halbrecht looked out over the world he had known since childhood, The land scarred by war, the sky that had never known peace, the fortress walls built from the bones of generations, the training fields, the casseurs, the trenches, the tears, the laughter, the endless drill, the endless war, the pride. He felt no regret. "No," he said softly, "we will carry them." Syrah closed her eyes, tears finally falling, not of pain, but of reverence. The Necron Titan raised one last arm, its fingers crumbling to dust even as they lifted. Its core dimmed, its voice weakened to a whisper, more felt than heard. Cadia stands, and the Titan collapsed, its body dissolving into drifting shards of light that fell like dying stars. The planet shuddered in its death throes. The mantle buckled, the crust fragmented. A shockwave of emerald and crimson fire erupted outward, consuming everything. Cities vanished in blasts of incandescent fury. The surface of Cadia split apart like glass heated and quenched too quickly. The atmosphere ignited. The sky turned black. The world that had stood immovable for 10,000 years ended, but in orbit, aboard a drifting memory capsule of ancient Necron design. Two figures awakened. They floated in weightless silence, the capsule holding them suspended among softly glowing crystal conduits. Outside the transparent viewport, Cadia's fragments drifted like embers of a world burned clean. The rift's light still swirled, but something had changed. The breach did not expand. The seal held. The Citan had not risen. Cadia had died, but it had fulfilled its purpose. Syrah pressed a trembling hand to the viewport, watching the remnants of their world drift apart in slow, silent arcs. "There's nothing left," she whispered. Halbrecht stood beside her. His armor was scorched and cracked, his skin pale with loss of blood, but his eyes held a terrible clarity. "There is everything left," he answered. "Cadia will be remembered not as the world that broke, but the world that held when no other could." Far in the distance, through the drifting remains of a fallen world, the golden light of the Astronomicon flickered, steady, unwavering. Hope had not died with Cadia. It had been forged from it. A signal began to pulse in the memory capsule. A beacon, a transmission, not human, not Necron. A message meant to be carried, a story meant to be told, a final, unbreakable truth. Cadia had chosen its end. It had not been defeated. Halbrecht and Syrah watched the last fragments of their world drift into the void. Neither spoke. Some things are too sacred for words. The capsule drifted through the void, carried not by engines or thrust, but by remnants of gravitational shockwaves from Cadia's death. The viewport framed the broken world in a sorrowful mosaic, jagged fragments glowing faintly as they caught the distant light of the system's dying sun. Halbrecht and Syrah remained in silence for long minutes, anchored only by the soft hum of the Necron stasis lattice that held the chamber's oxygen and pressure steady. Time had lost its meaning. There was no battlefield now, no trenches, no regiments awaiting orders, only the weight of what had been done. Sarah's hand remained pressed to the viewport, fingers splayed, as though she could somehow still touch the world that had shaped her. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "We should be dead." Halbrecht did not look away from the drifting shards of Cadia. "We were meant to be. And yet, this," she gestured to the capsule, "this vessel, this preservation. Why save us? Why save any of this?" His brow furrowed slightly. He understood the question. He had been asking himself the same thing, in the silence that filled his chest where certainty had once lived. "Because memory is the only victory that matters when a world falls," he said, voice dark and low. The Necron Titan said it. We are not survivors. We are witnesses. The word echoed, heavy with meaning neither could yet grasp. Sarah drew back from the viewport, breathing deeply, grounding herself with the discipline of a lifetime. Then we need to know where we are being sent, or where this capsule intends to take us. Halbrecht moved to the crystalline interface at the capsule's core. It pulsed faintly, responding to proximity. Primitive by Necron standards, yet beyond anything humanity could replicate. He placed a hand upon it. His armor gauntlet sparked faintly, still damaged from his confrontation with the War Master. Yet the interface recognized the contact, its pale green light brightening. A projection unfurled before them, cold, geometric lines forming a star map of the segmentum obscurus. Halbrecht leaned in. "Not a destination," he murmured. "A message." The projection focused on Cadia's former coordinates, now occupied by a gravity well of shattered planetary mass. From there, it traced a line outward, not toward Terra, not toward the Imperium's heart, but toward a sector beyond stable warp lanes, a region known in Imperial records only as a void anomaly zone. Uncharted, undersupplied, forgotten. Sarah frowned. The capsule intends to travel there. Not intends. Halbrecht studied the shifting vectors. It is already altering course. We are moving. Sarah felt a chill. If the Necrons wanted their prison sealed forever, why send the memory of it anywhere? Halbrecht exhaled slowly. Because they know what we do. That chaos will not accept defeat. They will come again. They will try to locate the prison once more. And when they do, someone must remember how it was sealed. Her eyes widened. Someone must remember how to seal it again. He nodded once. The realization hit them both, not like fear, but like duty returning after the brief space where grief had lived. The capsule shuddered as it slipped into a path guided not by warp currents, but by gravitational folds, slow, ancient, deliberate. No warp travel, no risk of corruption. A journey that might take years, or decades. Time, for the first time, belonged to them. Halbrecht stepped back, but the projection shifted again. This time not to stars, but to imagery. Memory. The recording the Titan had spoken of. Images flickered into existence, forming in careful stages. Cadia before the war, green training fields beneath storm-haze skies, children running between drill lines, mock rifles clutched awkwardly in hands that would one day hold real ones. Then the Cassas, tall, proud bastions of iron and stone lit by torch and signal beacon. Then the walls, those walls that had stood for millennia. Sarah's breath caught. It saved this, it remembered. But the memories did not stop. The projection shifted to the valley, the battlefield before the final siege, soldiers taking positions with weary resolve, the 501st standing shoulder to shoulder, armored columns forming the spearhead line. Sarah recognized faces she had known, fought beside, laughed with, people who had died in the collapse. Then, Halbrecht, on the battlements, addressing Cadia for the last time. The memory was not sound alone. It carried weight, the collective spirit of a people who had never known surrender. Sarah stood motionless, tears sliding down her cheeks in silence. Halbrecht watched himself in that moment, not as a commander, but as a man who had carried more than anyone life should. He did not feel pride nor regret, only recognition. When the memory ended, the capsule fell dark again, save for a single glowing sigil pulsing slowly, patiently. A reminder, a record, a message for the future. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand. We are the ones who carry this, not as heroes, not as martyrs. As the truth, Halbrecht finished. A faint tremor passed through the capsule. Not violent, not threatening, just enough to draw their attention to the viewport once more. The debris of Cadia was spreading, forming a ring of stone and metal in the orbit where a world once stood, like a crown for something no longer there. Sarah watched the fragments drift. Do you think anyone else survived? Halbrecht thought of the regiments off-world, the Cadians stationed across the galaxy, those who had never set foot on Cadia, yet carried it in their bones. Yes, he said softly. Cadia lives in every soldier who ever bore its name. And then, as though summoned by the thought, the capsule received a transmission, a weak signal, fragmented, warped by distance and static, a voice, Cadian. To any surviving forces, Cadia stands. Repeat, Cadia stands. Sarah's breath broke on a silent sob. Halbrecht placed a hand over the Vox controls. This is Lord Castellan Varon Halbrecht of the 93rd. Cadia lives. We carry its memory. Coordinates transmitting. Stand fast. Static. Then, we hear you, Castellan. The guard stands ready. Name the field, and we march. Halbrecht felt a weight settle into place inside his chest. Not crushing, but anchoring. The burden of the living. We will not choose the field, he said. The war will choose it, and when it calls, we answer. The signal ended. The capsule continued its silent journey into the void. Halbrecht stood beside Sarah, looking out into the endless dark. Cadia was gone, but Cadia stood. And the galaxy did not yet understand what that meant, but it would. They would make certain of that. The capsule entered the deep void, the last light of Cadia shrinking behind it until it became nothing more than a distant flicker in the vast dark sea of space. No warp engines ignited, no thrusters burned. The vessel moved as if carried by some ancient force, slow and precise, following a trajectory drawn before any human had ever walked upon soil. Silence stretched around them, a quiet so absolute that even thought seemed louder within it. Halbrecht sat near the central console, hands braced against the crystalline surface. His armor, cracked and scorched, still bore the symbols of Cadia. Sarah sat across from him, knees drawn in slightly, her rifle resting beside her. Not out of distrust, but because it felt wrong to put it aside. Weapons were not merely tools to Cadians. They were identity, continuity, proof that one still intended to stand. The memory stone embedded in the capsule's core pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. Not urgent, not fading, simply there, as if waiting to be spoken aloud. Sarah finally broke the silence. When we touch ground again, wherever that may be, how do we begin? What do we tell them? How do we explain? Her voice trailed off, the enormity of it too heavy to contain in words. Halbrecht's gaze remained steady. We tell them Cadia fell to save them. We tell them the gate was held, that our world chose its death so the galaxy could live. Sarah exhaled, not in relief, but in acceptance. There will be those who refuse to believe it, who say we failed, that we allowed the War Master to take everything. Halbrecht's voice was low. Those who have never stood where we stood speak quickly of failure. Sarah's eyes softened, not in pity, but in understanding. She had seen Halbrecht command in the worst hours of Cadia's existence. She knew the weight he carried was not pride nor sorrow, but responsibility. Time in the capsule did not pass in moments, but in cycles. Meals consumed in silence, injuries cleaned with makeshift supplies, rest taken in brief, dreamless intervals. They marked nothing by clocks or chronometers, only by the fading glow of the dying sun behind them and the slow rotation of distant starfields ahead. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed before they noticed the change. The capsule's trajectory pulled it toward a scattering of stars, faint pinpricks forming a subtle pattern, a cluster not listed on any standard imperial charts. Halbrecht recognized the configuration only because it had been shown within the Necron projection, coordinates linked to the prison's legacy. Sarah leaned forward, watching as the stars brightened. "We're arriving." The capsule slowed, not with engines, but with an invisible deceleration field. Halbrecht watched the motion with quiet apprehension. Whatever intelligence guided this vessel, it understood physics beyond imperial reckoning. As the capsule drifted closer, shapes emerged from the void, structures of black stone floating in silent formation. They were not ships, not space stations. They resembled monolithic shards, each etched with faintly glowing runes. Sarah stiffened. Necron architecture. Halbrecht's hand moved instinctively to his weapon, but he did not draw it. The capsule slowed further, gliding toward the nearest shard. Then the entire formation shifted, not moved, reoriented, as though the structures were acknowledging the capsule and recognizing it. The capsule stopped. The runes across the black stone brightened. A voice, soft, layered, neither male nor female, entered their thoughts. "Witnesses of Cadia. The memory has been carried, the sacrifice recorded. The lock remains sealed." Sarah swallowed, her throat tightening. "You brought us here to preserve us." The voice resonated gently. "To ensure the truth endures, for the stars forget, empires fade, but a sacrifice such as this must not be allowed to erode." Halbrecht took a step forward. "Why us? Out of all who fought, all who fell, why choose us?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because you chose. The galaxy will tell stories of Cadia's fall. Some will name it defeat, some will name it tragedy. But truth is not held by the many. It is carried by the few who lived it." Sarah lowered her gaze. "We did what we had to. Anyone else would have done the same." "No," the voice replied, and for a moment it seemed almost sorrowful. "History is written by those who act when others hesitate." The shard before them shifted, an opening forming in the surface like stone unfolding under silent command. "Step forward, witnesses." Halbrecht hesitated, but only for a moment. He turned to Sarah. "We go together." She nodded, and they stepped forward. The interior of the monolith was not cold or austere, but strangely quiet, calm, filled with soft light that felt neither mechanical nor natural. The floor beneath, their feet hummed faintly, like the pulse of a sleeping heartbeat. The voice spoke again, closer now, surrounding them. "Your memory will be preserved here, but your lives are your own. You are not bound to this place. You may choose to rest, to remain, or to return to the Imperium." Halbrecht's jaw tightened. Return to a galaxy that does not yet know what happened. One that does not understand what was prevented. One where the war will continue, without Cadia. Sarah looked to him, and her eyes were clear. "That is why we return," she said. Halbrecht felt the truth of it settle within him. Quiet, solemn, undeniable. They were not done. The voice acknowledged her words with a resonance like the tolling of a distant bell. "Then you will be carried." A section of the monolith opened again, revealing a chamber, sleek, angular, unmistakably built for travel. A vessel, small, fast, designed not for war, but for journey. Sarah exhaled. A ship. Halbrecht placed a hand against the hull. It responded not with lights or sounds, but with recognition. The voice spoke one final time. "Go, witnesses. Carry Cadia with you, not as a lament, but as a promise. The chamber brightened, enveloping them in soft white light. Their capsule, the tomb of memory, remained behind, suspended among the monoliths. As the new vessel activated, the stars outside shifted into motion. The engines whispered, a sound like a sigh, like a story beginning instead of ending. Sarah sat at the helm. Halbrecht stood beside her, not as commander or soldier, but as keeper of a legacy. He spoke quietly, but the words carried the weight of a world. Set course for Imperial space. The galaxy must know. The stars stretched into lines. The ship leapt forward, cutting through the dark. Cadia had fallen, but the memory of Cadia was coming home. The vessel slipped through void space without the warp's distortion, riding the ancient, unseen currents of gravitational drift. There was no howling of demons, no distortion of time, no whispers clawing at the mind. Only the endless silence of real space, vast and cold. Halbrecht stood near the forward viewplate, watching as familiar constellations emerged and brightened. The stars of the segmentum obscurus came into view once more, not as symbols of home, but of what remained after home was gone. Sarah sat at the helm, fingers resting lightly against controls that responded as though reading intent rather than touch. The ship did not demand command. It simply understood destination. She watched the displays as faint transponder signals flickered into range, Imperial codes, faint and scattered. The Imperium had not died in Cadia's fall, but it had been shaken. Rearmament orders, emergency musters, pleas for reinforcement, reports of worlds burning at the edge of the cicatrix maledictum. The galaxy had not paused to mourn. It had bled. Halbrecht's voice was steady, but quiet. Open a broad-spectrum hailing signal, Cadian command codes. They may be old, but carriers of our lineage know no expiration. Sarah exhaled slowly and keyed the vox link. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. This is Castellan Baron Halbrecht of the 93rd. Cadian survivors aboard a... He hesitated, searching for a term comprehensible to Imperial systems. Provisional transport, broadcasting identity imprint, and authentication. He glanced at Sarah, and she activated the memory capsule's imprint projection. A cascade of encrypted signals flowed outward, ancient Cadian cipher lattices woven through with genetic and service verification. The channel filled with static. No reply. Then voices, dozens overlapping, uncertain. Shocked. Repeat that identification. Cadia has fallen. This cannot be. Confirm identity metrics. Voice profile matches. Emperor's light. Halbrecht waited, his face unreadable. Then one voice cut through the others. Steady, controlled, carrying weight. This is Lord General Myra Elian of Battle Group Cerberus. Castellan Halbrecht. If this signal is genuine, then you return to an Imperium that has changed. The skies tear and the warp bleeds. The cicatrix maledictum has split the galaxy. Half of our worlds are cut from the Emperor's light. Cadia's loss was the first fracture. Sarah's hands tightened on the controls. The galaxy fractured because Cadia fell. No. Halbrecht answered before the Vox could. The galaxy fractured because Cadia held, because the warp was forced to bear its full weight against a single world for too long. A dam cannot endure past its design. We did not fail. We endured beyond what any world was meant to, and when the dam burst, the galaxy took the flood. Silence. Then Elian again, softer now. If you return to Imperial Command, you will be asked to explain what happened. There are those who will demand blame, others who will seek to make you a symbol. Halbrecht's breath left him in a slow, cold exhale. I did not return to be a symbol. I returned because something sleeps beneath the remains of Cadia, something that must never be sought. The channel crackled. We will send escort. Within minutes, the dark was broken by the flare of thrusters. A formation of Imperial ships moved into view, massive, armoured, battered from recent engagements. Their hulls bore scars from demon claws and lance strikes. The largest, a Retribution-class battleship, glided forward like a drifting monument. Its prow was adorned with the Cadian gate sigil, painted in morning black. Halbrecht and Sarah stood together as the Necron-forged vessel drifted toward the docking bay. Imperial safeguard protocols engaged. Tractor beams locked. Auto-turrets calibrated. The entire battleship held its breath. The hangar bay opened. Cadian shock troopers stood ready, rifles raised, not hostile but tense. Their armour bore new scars, new unit markings. Many were younger than the siege had been. Some had never seen Cadia, yet they wore the name. The vessel touched down with a soft, resonant thrum. The ramp lowered with slow mechanical grace. The air beyond was warm, heavy with recycled oxygen and the faint smell of gun oil. Halbrecht stepped forward first. His boots touched Imperial steel. He braced for disbelief. Instead, the nearest shock trooper knelt. Not in reverence, in grief. One by one, the others followed. A silent acknowledgement. A ritual older than any manual. Sarah's voice broke, if only for a moment. They thought no one survived. We didn't, Halbrecht murmured. Not as we were. Lord General Elian approached. Tall, iron-grey hair, eyes sharp with exhaustion, and the kind of resolve only forged by unending war. She studied them both with a commander's scrutiny, not for threat, but for truth. You carry the memory of Cadia, she said. Halbrecht met her gaze. We carry its final decision. Elian nodded once. Then come. There are things you must see, and others who must hear you speak. She turned, leading them through arched corridors lined with banners. Regiments destroyed, worlds fallen, victories won at unforgivable cost. The vessel thrummed around them, a city of steel and purpose. Halbrecht walked with heavy steps. Sarah paced beside him, silent but alert. Soldiers passed them in the halls, some with eyes widening in recognition, others pausing out of instinctive respect. No cheers, no celebration, just acknowledgement. They reached the strategium. A hololithic projection dominated the chamber. The Imperium was divided by a wound across the stars, a jagged, bleeding rift of raw warp fire splitting worlds, fleets and fates. Sarah stared. This is the cicatrix maledictum. Elian nodded grimly. The Imperium is broken into two halves. Communications are fractured, reinforcement chains severed, faith shaken, and the forces of the ruinous powers grow bold. We hold the line, but the line wavers. Halbrecht took it in, slowly, deeply, with the weight of one who has seen a world die. Then Cadia's sacrifice was not the end, he said quietly. It was only the beginning. Elian's gaze sharpened. There will be those who say Cadia should have held longer, that its fall was failure. Sarah stepped forward, voice like tempered steel. Let them say it. From the safety of worlds, Cadia bought them. Elian almost smiled. We cannot rebuild Cadia, but we can rebuild what it meant. If you will speak, Castellan, if you will stand where the galaxy can hear you, then Cadia may live where it matters. Halbrecht looked at the rift again, spreading like a wound across the stars. He thought of the children on Cadia's training fields. He thought of the soldiers in the valley of shattered glass. He thought of the world breaking beneath his feet, and he understood. "We will speak," he said, "but we will not speak of loss." Sarah finished, for him. "We speak of duty." Elian inclined her head. "Then the galaxy will listen." Outside the viewport, the stars burned, cold, distant, endless. The war was not over. It had only entered its next hour. Cadia had fallen, but Cadia would lead again. The strategium dimmed as the hololithic projection shifted, replacing the fractured star chart with a single symbol. The 8-pointed star of the Imperium's High Command. Halbrecht and Sarah stood beside Lord General Elian as officers filed into the chamber. Some wore the white and green of Cadian diaspora regiments. Others bore the heraldry of distant worlds now pressed into endless defense. All of them stopped when they saw Halbrecht. The quiet that followed was not awe. It was mourning given shape. They had all heard the stories. They all knew the name Cadia. But to see a man who had stood on that final ground was something else entirely. Elian spoke first. "Castellan Halbrecht brings witness to the fall of the gate. He will speak so that we understand not only what was lost, but why." She stepped aside. The projection shifted again. The Cadian gate, before the fracture. Then Cadia, whole, suspended against the howling warp. Then the shattering. Halbrecht did not flinch as the memory replayed. He heard the screams again, felt the quake of collapsing stone beneath boots, saw the fire rising from the rift. But he let the images pass before him without breaking. Grief had its place, but it did not belong here. He spoke, voice steady. Cadia did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it was strong. It stood beyond what any world should endure. For 10,000 years the gate held, because generations of Cadians held it with their bodies, their blood, and their will. He allowed silence to settle. He did not force conviction. He simply offered truth. When the warp tore open, when the eye swelled into the storm that now splits the galaxy, it was not a sign of defeat. It was the cost of our success. We held back a tide that was never meant to be stopped. When the dam broke, it broke because it had done what it was built to do. A murmur rippled through the gathered officers. Less disbelief now, more comprehension. Some lowered their heads. Some stood taller. Sarah stepped forward, her voice quiet but unshaking. Cadia's fall was not the end of our duty. It is the beginning of yours, of ours. Every regiment that bears the name Cadian now carries the memory of a world that chose sacrifice over surrender. Elian nodded once, and the projection shifted to display scattered Cadian regiments across the Imperium. Remnants of armies, shattered battalions, training cadres who had never seen their homeworld. "They are scattered," Elian said, "but they are not broken. Many are requesting consolidation and reorganization. They want to know if they still have a command to answer to." Halbrecht understood what she was asking, not as a question of strategy, but of identity. "Cadian command died with Cadia," he said. A few officers inhaled sharply, but Cadian duty did not. The hololithic light flickered, pulling focus to a set of coordinates flashing in amber, marking a world within stable warp transit range, a fortress world under siege, its defenses buckling under the pressure of heretic forces. Elian gestured to the projection. "This is Caldrin Prime, a key bastion protecting the Celestium March corridor. If it falls, 3 subsectors lose reinforcement chains. They do not need rescue. They need leadership. They need an example." Sarah understood. "You want Cadia to stand there." Elian turned to Halbrecht. "Not the world, the name." The strategium fell silent again. Not hesitant this time, but waiting. Halbrecht looked upon the coordinates of Cauldron Prime. The trajectory was not long. The battle was already underway. He remembered the storm-lit valley, the screams of the 501st, the weight of a sword driven into the earth to break a world. He remembered the Necron Titan's final words. Cadia stands. He felt that truth, not just as memory, but as charge. "We go," Halbrecht said. A quiet exhale passed through the officers. Relief, resolve, permission to hope. Sarah straightened. "We will need to gather the scattered Cadian regiments. Some are garrison forces, others integrated into other armies." Elian nodded. "Orders will be transmitted under your authority. There will be resistance from command structures that believe themselves senior to you. They will have to learn otherwise." Halbrecht's voice cooled. "They will." The meeting dissolved into motion. Officers called up command strings, vox channels, reinforcement requests. The vast machinery of imperial war shifted, turning like a wounded giant forced to rise again. But beneath all of it, there was something steadier, quieter, stronger. Pride, not in victory, in continuation. Later, in the docking bay, as the vessel prepared to leave, soldiers gathered to watch. Not cheering. Cadians did not cheer for commanders. They watched like they were watching a standard being raised, a signal that the line had not ended. Sarah tightened the straps on her armor, movements precise, ritualistic. Halbrecht watched the maintenance crews finish rearming their ship. Imperial technicians inspected the alien systems with reverent suspicion, unable to comprehend them, yet respecting them all the same. One young soldier approached, helmet tucked under his arm. His armor bore the black and green of the 302nd. He stopped a step before Halbrecht, standing at rigid attention. "Sir," he said, voice steady but young, "my parents died at Casa Kraft. My brother died in the retreat from the Pillar Plains. I thought Cadia was gone. Not just the world, but all of it." Halbrecht studied him, not his wounds, not his rank, but his eyes. He saw the inheritance of every Cadian who had ever gripped a rifle and stepped into a storm. "What is your name?" Halbrecht asked. "Trooper Garin Holt, sir." Halbrecht placed a hand on Holt's shoulder, not as a blessing, but as recognition. "Cadia lives in you," he said. "It lives wherever you stand. So stand well." Holt's throat tightened, not in weakness, but in the kind of emotion Cadians were never taught how to voice. He saluted, sharp as a blade, and stepped back into formation. Sarah joined Halbrecht at the boarding ramp. "They'll follow you," she said softly. Halbrecht shook his head. "They'll follow Cadia. We only carry the torch." Sarah gave a faint, tired smile. "Then let's make sure it stays lit." They boarded, the hatch sealed. The ship detached from the docking arms, drifting out into the dark before the drives ignited with a silent flare. No roar, no thunder, only motion. Caldrin Prime's coordinates burned steady on their navigation array. Halbrecht stood in the viewport again, staring into the void that had once held their world. Sarah stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Halbrecht said, as if it was simply the truth of breath, "We do not rebuild Cadia." Sarah nodded. "We carry it forward." Outside, the stars stretched into lines. The ship leapt into the abyss. Cadia fell. Cadia stands. The ship emerged from transit into a region of flickering starlight and fire. Caldrin Prime filled the forward viewplate, its surface scarred by craters and burning trench lines, its atmosphere streaked with smoke and the dark silhouettes of falling ships. Haloed in flame, its orbital defense platforms sputtered with failing power grids, their shields fluctuating under continuous bombardment. A fleet of heretic vessels surrounded the world like vultures circling carrion, rusted hulls adorned with spikes, banners, and the grotesque symbols of the dark gods. Halbrecht studied the tactical readouts as Sarah stabilized the ship's trajectory, cutting into the war zone with the practiced calm of a soldier who had flown through hell before. Alarms flared on Imperial channels. Requests for reinforcement cascaded in panicked bursts. Kaldrim Prime's defensive fleet was in shambles. The outer bastions had fallen. The heretic forces were pressing toward the capital stronghold, the last bastion of resistance on the planet's surface. If that fell, the subsectors beyond would be exposed like open arteries. Serra's voice remained steady. "We'll need to break through the blockade to make planetfall." Halbrecht nodded, assessing the vessel's capabilities. They had no gun batteries, no torpedo tubes, no shields by Imperial definition. And yet the ship did not move as prey. It slipped through firing arcs with preternatural ease, gliding through the battlefield like a breath in the silence between lightning strikes. Every time a lance of warp-tainted energy neared, the ship veered a fraction of a meter, evading without effort. The heretic fleet noticed. A Vox channel crackled to life, saturated with static and malice. Unregistered vessel entering siege perimeter. Declare allegiance or be reduced to kindling in the sight of the Dark Master. Sarah suppressed a bitter laugh. Their arrogance is almost comforting. Halbrecht keyed the broad transmitter. His voice carried no anger, only iron finality. Castellan Baron Halbrecht of Cadia, I do not negotiate with traitors. The enemy fell silent, but only for a moment. Then the channel erupted into howling voices, fury and disbelief mixing in a chorus of profaned rage. Cadia is dust. A ghost, a name that means nothing. Halbrecht answered, with 3 words that cut deeper than any blade. Cadia still stands. Sarah angled the ship toward the upper atmosphere. Enemy fire intensified. Fragments of void ships burned around them, scattering debris like shattered constellations. The vessel responded not with brute strength, but with something older. Its hull shifting along invisible lines, bending around reality rather than resisting force. They were already slipping through layers of atmosphere before the heretic fleet fully understood that the ship was not one they could track. Clouds swallowed them, roaring wind buffeting the hull. Fire trails streaked overhead as burning debris rained from orbit, turning the sky into a red river of falling stars. Then the surface came into view. Kaldrim Prime was ash and trenches and fire, but there was structure, command lines, defensive formations, banners still standing in mud and blood. Imperial Guard regiments fought shoulder to shoulder across the ridge lines. Artillery roared, tanks burned. Vox amplified commands cut through the chaos. And at the center of the main defense line, a banner rose above the trenches, a faded, worn Cadian gate sigil, carried by a regiment that had never known Cadia, but had sworn to fight in its name. Sarah spoke softly. They don't know we survived. Then we show them, Halbrecht replied. The ship landed behind the trenches with the quiet grace of something shaped not by human hands. The ramp descended. The first soldiers to see them froze. Their armor was caked in soil and charred from shrapnel, faces streaked with grime and exhaustion. One of them, bearing the rank sigils of a lieutenant, stepped forward with rifle raised, not hostile, but wary. Identify yourselves. Halbrecht stepped forward, the fading scars on his armor unmistakable. Castellan Halbrecht of the 93rd Cadian, he said, voice carrying through roaring artillery thunder like a command that reality itself must obey. The lieutenant's expression broke, not into shock, not into disbelief, but into something far more dangerous. Recognition. Whispers rippled through the trench line. Castellan. Cadia. Cadia survived. A sergeant knelt. Others followed, not in obedience, but in acknowledgement of something sacred. Halbrecht lifted a hand, not to command, but to raise them again. "No kneeling," he said. "Cadians stand." Their spines straightened instantly. Sarah addressed the officers nearest her. "What is your current situation?" The lieutenant steadied himself. "Heretic forces advancing from the southern basin. Armoured push supported by corrupted artillery emplacements. We've held the ridge for 4 days, but we're out of reserves. If the next line breaks, the capital falls." Halbrecht absorbed the information in silence. Then he turned toward the battlefield. Smoke rose from craters, tanks rolled across churned earth, and the roar of enemy war machines echoed across the valley. And among the heretics' ranks, banners bearing the 8-pointed star rippled in the burning wind. It was familiar, sickeningly familiar. This was a battle Cadia had fought 1,000 times. Halbrecht stepped onto the forward firing step, raising his voice to carry across the trench line, not as a speech, but as an order. "Cadians, you hold this ground not for glory, not for survival, but because the galaxy needs you to hold it. You carry our world in your blood. Let the enemy feel the weight of every casa that ever stood, every soldier that ever marched, every child that ever learned to fire before they learned to speak." The wind shifted. The smoke parted just enough for the soldiers to see his face. "Cadia did not fall. We chose our end so the Imperium could endure, but our duty did not die with our world." His voice rose, not a shout, but a command carried on the bones of history. "Now stand. Stand as Cadia has always stood." The regiments responded, not with cheering, but with the thunder of rifles being locked, tank engines roaring to life, and voices shouting in unison across the trenches. "Cadia stands!" The battlefield shifted, not in terrain, in spirit. Sarah moved to the artillery crews, directing fire adjustments with calm precision. Halbrecht strode toward the forward trenches, drawing his sword. Soldiers followed, not out of obedience, but because their hearts recognized what marched ahead of them. A world could die, a fortress could fall, but a duty born into blood could not be extinguished. The heretic charge surged forward, a tide of madness and metal and roaring engines. Halbrecht raised his blade. Forward. The Cadians surged. The lines collided. Gunfire lit the world in strobing bursts, and for the first time since Cadia broke beneath the weight of a galaxy's sin, the Imperium did not just fight, it remembered. The valley became a storm of fire and steel. Cadian rifles sang in disciplined bursts, their muzzle flashes strobing like heartbeat signals across trenches carved from mud, bone, and shattered ferrocrete. The heretic war engines advanced in grinding waves, hulls rusted, hulls fused with screaming faces, tracks chewing through corpses and ash. The air tasted of burning promethium, chem propellant, and the copper tang of blood drawn into every breath. Halbrecht moved through the forward trench line like a blade drawn in silence. He gave no rallying cry now. The time for words had passed. Only action remained. Sarah's voice carried across Vox relays, adjusting artillery fire with the calm precision of someone who had watched doom fall from the sky and refused to yield. Her tone cut through panic like a scalpel through fevered flesh. Shift battery 3x14 meters west. Overlap with Kasserkin fire corridor. Fire on mark 5, 4, 3. Mark. A volley of shells screamed overhead, tearing into the heretic flanks. The shockwave rolled across the lines, shaking dirt from the trench walls. Sergeant Holt, his face streaked with grit and sweat, shouted the order before Halbrecht even needed to speak. "Advance line. Keep formation. Don't give the bastards ground." The Cadians vaulted from the trenches in disciplined ranks. No hesitation, no scattered rush. They moved as though the world did not allow them to do otherwise. Bolters thundered from the ridgeline. Chiming laser guns rose and fell in synchronized recoil, and the ground shook beneath the march of armored boots. Halbrecht reached the crest of a shattered hill and saw the enemy line clearly now. A massive figure led them, a warlord armored in jagged plating, its helm crowned with a ring of spikes bearing skulls charred black. It carried a chain axe the size of a power generator, each tooth sparking with demonic fire. As it advanced, the ground trembled. It was not Abaddon, no, but it carried the mark of those who followed him. A champion forged from the same shadow. The warlord roared across the battlefield, a sound like a furnace devouring flesh. His legion surged behind him, a tide of corruption and zealotry. Sarah came to stand beside Halbrecht, just as the rear artillery thundered again. Her armor bore new cuts, new cracks. Smoke rolled from its shoulders like a cloak. Her rifle was slick with blood, none of it her own. Her breathing was steady, always steady. "We cannot hold the ridge indefinitely," she said, without looking at him. "If their flank reinforces, they'll overrun our lines before we can regroup." Halbrecht nodded. "I know. And you're thinking of leading a forward strike to break their center." Halbrecht did not respond. The silence was answer enough. For a moment, the battlefield noise seemed distant. The two of them stood together, not as commander and officer, but as the last remnants of a world burned to dust. Sarah's gaze did not waver. "Then I am coming with you." Halbrecht's jaw tightened, not with refusal, but with acceptance that ran deeper than command. "We go together." They turned toward the trench line, where the remaining shock troops gathered. Kasrkin veterans, the kind who did not flinch at death because they had seen it too many times to be moved by its threats. Holt stepped forward, saluting without ceremony. "Orders, Castellan." Halbrecht pointed toward the warlord, who carved a path through the battlefield like a living siege ram. "We break their spear. We take the head." Holt's expression hardened into something that bordered on reverence. "For Cadia." The Kasrkin echoed. "For Cadia." No shout, no scream, just the unshakable certainty of a vow. They surged forward across the open ground, lasfire tracing lines of white heat through the smoke. The heretic forces saw them and responded in kind. Bolters snapping, corrupted autoguns spitting jagged metal. The advance pivoted from precision to brutal chaos, but the Cadians did not falter. They closed the distance with the inevitability of a tide. Then they met. Halbrecht's sword clashed with the warlord's chain axe in an eruption of sparks and raw force. The shockwave rippled through the bodies around them, flinging men and metal alike. The warlord pressed forward, towering, monstrous, armor reinforced with the ruinous blessings of the warp. Halbrecht held, his boots grinding into the stone, teeth set. "You are ash," the warlord snarled, voice cracking like molten iron poured onto ice. "Your world is dust. Your legacy is—" Halbrecht drove his forehead into the warlord's helm. The metal cracked. The warlord reeled, stunned. Halbrecht spoke through his teeth, the words carved from every memory Cadia had given him. "We are the wall that stands while empires fall." Sarah struck from the flank, her power blade slicing into the warlord's armored knee joint. The giant buckled, roaring in fury. Holt and the Kasrkin fired point blank into its exposed side, plasma bolts exploding against corrupted ceramite. The warlord swung wildly, catching one trooper and sending him crashing into the ground with bone-shattering force. Halbrecht seized the opening. He stepped in and drove his sword through the warlord's chest. The chain axe fell from the giant's hand. The warlord staggered, choking on its own breath, black smoke leaking from its wounds. It collapsed with a seismic weight, the ground trembling as though the world itself exhaled. The heretic line faltered. Then it broke. Their morale shattered not from numbers, not from firepower, but from the sight of unstoppable belief. The Cadians pressed forward, driving them back into their own burning wreckage. The valley shifted, the flank collapsed, the siege broke. Sarah wiped blood from her visor with the back of her glove. The field is ours. Halbrecht did not answer immediately. He looked at the fallen warlord, at the burning horizon, at the soldiers who stood, bleeding, exhausted, relentless. He understood now what Cadia had become. Not place, not fortress, not even memory. A force, a vow carried forward. He turned to his troops. "We hold here, reinforce the ridge, prepare for counterstrike. Cauldron Prime will not fall." The Cadians saluted. No hesitation, no doubt. Because the line had not broken. It had moved forward. And the galaxy would learn, slowly, painfully, inevitably. Cadia did not die. Cadia became the foundation of everything that still stood. Smoke rolled over the battlefield in slow, drifting sheets, carrying with it the scent of burnt oil, blood, and earth torn open by artillery. The siege of Cauldron Prime had not ended in silence. It had ended in exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that seeped into bone and memory. The victory was real, but it did not feel triumphant. It felt earned the way a scar is earned, painfully, at the cost of something that will never wholly return. Halbrecht walked the ridge where the final clash had taken place. The warlord's corpse lay where it had fallen, its armor cooling to a dull, lifeless iron. Around it, Cadians moved among the wounded, carried their dead with quiet dignity, and rebuilt firing lines, not because they expected renewed assault immediately, but because rebuilding was what they had always done. To stop moving was to invite collapse. Sarah approached him slowly, her armor marked with new gashes, one arm bound tightly where shrapnel had torn through the plating. Pain flickered across her expression, only when she thought no one watched. But Halbrecht watched. He always had. "We held," Sarah said, her voice low, steady. "Cauldron Prime is secured. The enemy remnants are falling back into the forests south of the basin. Reinforcements from the Cerberus battle group will arrive within 2 days to take control of the perimeter." Halbrecht nodded. The words were correct, true, precise, yet they felt distant, as though they belonged to a report written long after the moment had passed. He looked past Sarah, toward the horizon where smoke thinned into pale blue sky. For the first time in what felt like centuries, there was sky above him that was not torn by warp storms. A soldier approached, Holt, limping but upright. His helmet was gone, revealing hair matted with dirt and blood. He saluted, though his hand shook. "Castellan," Holt said, voice rough. "We have the casualty lists. The 501st remnants have been folded into the 302nd. The artillery crews from the Gallow Hold battery request confirmation of new command structure. And..." He hesitated. "And?" Halbrecht prompted. Holt swallowed. "There are survivors from Cadia who didn't know." His voice broke, not in grief, but in restraint. They heard the broadcasts, the wrong ones, the heretic transmissions. They believed Cadia was taken, corrupted. Their morale is... He cut the sentence short, because Cadians did not allow themselves to say broken. They need clarity. Serra's gaze met Halbrecht's. The weight of the moment lay between them like a drawn line. Halbrecht nodded slowly. Gather them, the Cadians, and any Imperial officers who wish to hear truth. Holt saluted again, more firmly this time, and turned to relay the orders. Serra exhaled. This is where it becomes real, isn't it? Not the battle, not the sacrifice, when we speak it aloud. Yes, Halbrecht said. His voice held neither sorrow nor calm. It simply held truth. They walked toward the central trench where wounded soldiers rested alongside fresh reinforcements. A clearing had been made, rough and uneven, but sufficient to hold the crowd that gathered. Cadians, guardsmen from other regiments, officers whose eyes held grief they had no language for. Some bore Cadia's colours, others bore colours of worlds that no longer existed. Halbrecht stepped forward. The murmurs faded. The battlefield itself seemed to quiet. Cadia is gone, he said, not cruelly, not bluntly, but with the clarity of a surgeon cutting away infection. The words hit the crowd like a shockwave. Jawlines tightened. Some looked down. Others did not blink. But Cadia did not fall, he continued. Understand this. Hear it as I speak it. Cadia was not conquered. It did not kneel. It was not torn apart by the War Master's will. Cadia broke itself to seal something older than chaos. His voice did not rise. It deepened. We chose our ending. We chose sacrifice, not failure. Serra stepped forward beside him, not behind, not below, beside. Cadia did what no world has ever done, she said. It held the gate against a storm that could drown the galaxy. And when the choice came, fall and doom the Imperium, or break and save it, we broke. A young soldier in the crowd, barely past youth, face still marked by the last traces of innocence, lifted his voice. Then what are we now? If Cadia is gone, who are we? Silence followed. Not empty. Listening. Halbrecht's answer came with the slow inevitability of gravity. We are Cadia. He stepped forward, pointing not to himself, not to Serra, but to the crowd. It was never the stone, never the soil, never the walls. Cadia has always been the ones who stand, who hold when others flee, who choose duty when others choose life. He turned, looking at the wounded, the weary, the ones who could barely stand but refused to sit. You carry Cadia in blood, in bone, in how you aim your rifle, how you march, how you bury your dead without weeping, how you rise when the world tells you there is no point in rising. He paused, not for effect, but to allow breath to exist. Our world is gone, but our purpose is not, and so long as a single Cadian draws breath, his voice cut through the wind. Cadia stands. The response was not shouted. It was breathed, spoken through clenched teeth, exhaled through lungs filled with smoke, a vow born of grief and iron. Cadia stands. Serra closed her eyes, only for a heartbeat, and when she opened them, something old and unbreakable lived behind them again. The moment held, until the sound of boots approached from behind. Lord General Elian, her expression grave, not with sorrow, but with something like reverence. Castellan Halbrecht, Captain Serra, the High, Command has requested your presence aboard the command ship. Word of your return has spread faster than any signal we could control. They want answers. They want memory. They want guidance. Halbrecht did not ask what they wanted him to say. He already knew. He looked once more at the ridge, at the wounded being carried to medic posts, at Holt speaking quietly to shaken survivors, at the warlord's corpse cooling in the dirt, at the sky slowly clearing of smoke. He saw Cadia everywhere. He always would. Sarah spoke softly beside him. "Are you ready?" Halbrecht answered without hesitation. "No." Then he stepped forward. "But we go anyway." The soldiers parted for them, not as subordinates, but as kin. They walked toward the landing craft that would take them to orbit. The war was far from over. The Imperium was split, wounded, bleeding stars. New enemies waited. Old ones watched. The rift across the galaxy burned like a wound that refused to close. But Cadia had chosen its death, and in doing so, had chosen its legacy. As the craft lifted into the dark sky, Halbrecht looked down upon the battlefield, one last time. It was not a grave. It was a beginning.